This podcast is presented by Pacific Office Automation, proud partner of the Arizona Cardinals, and your one-stop shop for optimizing all your office technology. Visit pacificoffice.com. Problem solved.
Is it caught? Is it caught? Oh my goodness, it's caught! DeAndre Hopkins caught it! He caught it for a touchdown! You've got to be joking me!
Welcome to Cardinals Underground, presented by Pacific Office Automation. Visit pacificoffice.com. Problem solved.
Touchdown, Kyler Murray. That defender is in multiple pieces.
Oh, that was nasty right there, right?
The latest news and notes from the guys who cover the team.
Drilled by Simmons. Isaiah Simmons is balling.
Bring it on, bring it on.
Slammed to the ground by Budda Baker. Like a torpedo, he came flying into the backfield.
I ain't scared of nobody.
Here's Paul Calvisi.
You guys ever walk into an establishment with someone who refuses to have their back to the door? You ever gone to lunch or maybe grabbed a coffee with that guy? Maybe former law enforcement,
I was
CIA,
going to say,
FBI.
you hanging with mobsters?
Whether it's a brother-in-law of mine, whether certain other buddies of mine I grew up with who are now in law enforcement. There's so many guys that I've gone out to lunch or coffee with and they're like, no. Let me sit there. I want full view of the front door of this establishment. Well, that's me right now. Somebody, give me your seat over there, Felipe, because I need to have full view, because if the Turk comes through there, I mean, talk about keeping your head on a swivel. 'Tis the season for the final cuts to come down, and they are hot off the presses, and you never know who's next at this point. Paul Calvisi here, at least for now. Darren Urban there. Felipe Corral Jr. over on the other side of this table with the best view of the doorway. Why is my back to the door frame? I should have planned this out a little bit better, Felipe.
We're trying to get you whacked, Paul.
And as the rookie of this group, I asked our producer Jim if where I should sit, and he led me over here. So I have nothing to do with that decision.
Yeah, well, Holmes is in on it too. He knows before you know. So I don't trust.
He's kind of the Jim is the godfather of the radio studios.
I don't trust anything over there. We're only on a need to know basis around here on Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation, proud partner of the Arizona Cardinals. All right, so there you go. Around the horn we go. Big takeaways from the news. We were sitting around with our game faces on. Everyone's getting a little tense, a little anxious. There we were, well past the 1 o'clock deadline. Who exactly is going to make the team? And then, of course, there was the big headline regarding a guy who, going into camp, we had pretty much not even penciled in as a starter. I mean, we were using permanent ink. Were we not, Darren Urban? Go ahead, reveal the big reveal regarding cornerback.
Well, I mean, at this point, Malcolm Butler is apparently contemplating retirement, and the Cardinals put him on the reserve retired list. And, that kind of came out of left field in a lot of ways, because you're right. I mean, when you talk about him being a starter, I mean, I think we had gotten to the point where we were assuming they're going to have 3 cornerbacks on the field most of the time, which is what most teams do. That would be Murphy, Alford, and Malcolm Butler. And I did notice that it seemed like there were times in camp when Robert Alford wasn't on the COVID list, that when it was just 2 guys on the field, it was Alford and Murphy. Okay, not that big of a deal, I don't think. But I something not having Malcolm Butler now, at least is one while we're taping this, and as of this point, he hasn't been a practice, so I assume he's not going to be a practice all week this week. I mean, does he come back next week? Ironically, when they practice, they're getting ready for his former team, the Tennessee Titans. Does he come back, or is this a real thing? Is he really going to walk away from $3+ million? This is just kind of stunning to me. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I mean, this is kind of where we sit, and I hope when Cliff Kingsbury says that rookie Marco Wilson is more than capable of starting and playing a lot, that's truly the feel.
I mean, when I think of Marco Wilson, I kind of think of myself, someone departed from a specific role, and then
that's a big jump there.
I slide in and try to make the most out of the opportunity. But Kingsbury said, if there's someone in that group that's ready for this moment and isn't going to shy away from it, it's Marco Wilson.
Hey, look, you guys can agree or disagree, and I know you will. When I watched, and I was there for every single practice in camp, like you guys were as well. If you ask me who was the best corner in camp, forget the names in the back of their jerseys. There are no names in backs of jerseys in camp. So just who was the best corner in camp? Byron Murphy Jr. would be my answer. Would you guys concur with that?
I would agree with that.
No, I would agree.
The second best corner in camp. In camp. Not in his career. No resume. No preconceived notions. The second best corner in Cardinals camp, 3+ weeks, Marco Wilson.
Nice.
That's just me. Look, and of course, you know my qualifications as a 4-year DB at Leland High School and a guy who stood next to premier cornerbacks for a good 20+ years on the Cardinals sideline. I do feel qualified to make that statement.
Standing next to cornerbacks absolutely makes you an expert.
I do feel qualified to make that statement. But beyond that, I did talk to a lot of people who said, you know what? You know who had the most consistent camp at cornerback? Marco Wilson. And what did Christian Kirk tell us in the Big Red Rage not less than a week ago? That when it came to Marco Wilson, he didn't get roasted once. He didn't get burnt once. Normally, if you're a rookie especially, you can lose badly at times. And every single rep for Marco Wilson turned out to be a contested catch. Now, did he prevent every catch? Absolutely not. But he was right there in the hip pocket of every receiver seemingly every single snap.
And you think about the receivers that he's going up against. And Kingsbury mentioned it in his presser today that he never shied away from the competition of the DeAndre Hopkins, the A.J. Greens, the Christian Kirks. He lined up against every single receiver. And coming from the college that he comes from, facing some of the top receivers at LSU, the Bamas, et cetera, et cetera. So, he has experience. He's finally in rhythm, I feel, coming off that knee injury that he had 2 years ago. I feel like that's why he kind of dropped in the draft, right? Because he was coming off that knee injury. Teams didn't necessarily know, the type of performance he would put on the field. But I think he's 2 years removed from that. I think he's prepared for this opportunity. And like myself, he's going to make the most out of it.
It's funny.
And by the way, the drop in the draft also had something to do with the old Austin Powers. Who throws a shoe?
Yeah, that's true. The shoe.
Right? Where's Mike McCarthy when I need him for the mojo moment?
I'm happy to know that I understood that reference, Paul.
But I
better than the Cowboys room because Mike McCarthy's little motivational mojo went over like a lead balloon to start Cowboys camp on Hard Knocks.
My guess though is that if one of your top guys is throwing a shoe, no one's gonna really care. I mean that's the thing.
Hey man, if you're checking A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, you can throw the whole shoe department at Nordstrom's for all we care, as long as you lock them down.
It's funny when the news came out, and especially the idea that Marco Wilson might be the guy that's trying to take these reps from Butler if he's not around, and people want to bring up Brandon Williams, and this is a whole different deal. I mean, Brandon Williams was a 3rd-round pick, yes, but it was a stretch.
He was a converted running back.
He was a converted running back who'd play 1 year of corner, I think. This is a whole different deal. Marco Wilson is a natural cornerback. He's a better player.
He's from a cornerback family.
Yeah, I mean,
his older brother is a DB. His father coaches cornerbacks for a living.
I mean, and that doesn't automatically mean you're going to be successful in the NFL, but this is not a Brandon Williams situation. It's just not.
I mean, you got a guy who walked in at 18 years of age and was a starter as a true freshman at Florida, started all 4 years. So look, I'm not crowning him. I'm not proclaiming him. I'm just telling you what we saw in camp. Now, whether our boxers should start bunging in week 1 when you got a rookie out there against a Julio Jones and an A.J. Brown, okay. But guess what? Julio Jones got virtually no reps in camp. A.J. Brown has been banged up in Titans camp. Ryan Tannehill didn't play a single snap in the preseason. Neither did Derrick Henry.
On the COVID list.
He's on, the quarterback's on the COVID list. The head coach is on the COVID list. So there's going to be a lot of stuff flying around in all directions week 1.
See, to me, when we talk about Butler and we talk about Marco Wilson, I think you can have a conversation. You're like, okay, now we're assuming Robert Alford comes back in condition after missing 2 weeks, but Cliff Kingsbury seems to think that's going to happen. But, again, I think we're in a position now where it's not so much can Marco Wilson play, because we've talked about what he's done in training camp, and I think he can give you some stuff. And if you have a top 3 of Murphy and Alford and Wilson, you can make that work. The problem right now is, okay, what happens if somebody gets hurt? Are you going with Luke Barku? I think Tay Gowan is a guy, to me, after watching him in camp and games, he feels like a guy that could end up being this year's Eno Benjamin, where you don't want to cut him because somebody's going to grab him, but I don't know if he's ready to play, and maybe you have him inactive much of the time so he can learn how to play this game. And that's where I'm concerned right now, is of the depth at that position without Malcolm Butler.
Do you guys think that, with rosters being cut down, that a veteran cornerback is going to be made available in the next coming days?
I mean, I guess
Marcus Trufant. Excuse me.
Marcus Trufant, who's missed almost all of camp because he's been away from a team. Here's the thing. I'm not ruling anything out. Are you going to find somebody better than, for instance, Daryl Worley, who this team just cut? Maybe, maybe not.
You know who's still out there? Dre Kirkpatrick. Just throwing it out there.
I don't know if Dre's coming back. Again, if you think Marco Wilson's the guy, you want somebody who can step in and see. I think Dre Kirkpatrick's the guy you bring in if you need somebody to play right away. And if they're not going to play him right away, you need a guy that would potentially be on special teams. And if you really think, Luke Barku can play a little bit, then maybe you're getting him ready to be that guy. Because at first you're not going to need him, because with the way they're set up, you have those top three corners, you have Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, and you're going to use, I think, Isaiah Simmons back there a little bit here and there. So I don't think you need somebody if people are healthy.
I always think back to Byron Murphy, though, because I remember his rookie season, he kind of got thrown into the fire.
Yeah, he did.
And then look at him now. I think these reps would be valuable to someone like Marco Wilson once you look down the road and you see his growth throughout the season, similar to Byron Murphy.
Here's the rub, is that Byron Murphy ideally is a slot corner, that you would have a Marco Wilson and a Malcolm Butler on the outside. That Byron Murphy at his best is on the inside. So now if all of a sudden he's forced to play outside, that's where the trickle down of losing a Malcolm Butler seemingly would hit this Cardinals defense, at least as originally scripted and envisioned.
I guess, but long before Malcolm Butler ended up on the reserve retired list, Byron Murphy's been playing outside a lot.
He has.
When there's only two cornerbacks on the field, he's out there. So they can't feel that uncomfortable with him on the outside.
So the question becomes, all right, when they're running three corners out there, which in the past has been quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Now, whether you're going to do that against Tennessee, and if they're going to go power personnel with Derrick Henry, maybe the Cardinals are spared in week 1 and maybe even week 2, based on the fact that you have a pair of teams with premier running backs, big-time straight-ahead run games, and two, big-time legit receivers, both the Titans and the Vikings. So maybe you're not going three corners as much because, to your point, if Isaiah Simmons is a guy, now all of a sudden they're going to push off into the slot at times. And look, there were a number of safeties who lost their jobs, and you can't tell me, speaking of trickle-down effects, that wasn't due to Isaiah Simmons' ability to play in the slot.
And some of this is special team stuff and where guys can fit in. I mean, people are going to talk about Keyshawn Johnson. Part of the Keyshawn Johnson thing was he wasn't going to give you anything besides being a receiver. He just wasn't fitting in. He wasn't Trent Sherfield as a special teamer, so it didn't make a lot of sense, where Andy Isabella can potentially do some of those things, as much as fans are frustrated to hear that. When you talk about the cornerback stuff, I mean, I think Byron Murphy's still your slot. If your top three guys are healthy, your two outside guys are Alford and Marco Wilson.
Okay.
That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah. And it's after that. It's to your point. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
I have a roster here from the 23rd. I have a flip card here from the 24th of August. Luke Barku's not in either one of these. I had to go to my Saints flip card, which I don't know why I even still have, considering we were midair and we turned around heading back to Phoenix.
I was going to say that's got to be some kind of collectible, isn't it?
Maybe
you can frame it.
I'll get Luke Barku to sign this thing, and then I'll frame it up there.
Are we going to talk about our experiences in the air?
We're going to make this a folk tales, by the way.
You know, there was one guy in the plane who knew before anyone officially knew that the plane had turned around. Do you realize who that was?
I heard you guys talking about Walt Ellis. I got to be honest. I didn't hear anything. I only knew because Omo pointed it out to me on the icons.
Felipe, if I say Vulture 13, do you know who that is?
Of course not.
That's Walt Ellis, longtime radio engineer.
Of course not.
Longtime radio engineer, former Vietnam helicopter pilot, and recipient of a Purple Heart.
So is that why he was able to tell when the plane made a sudden move?
Based somehow on the elevation and the altitude, based on whether it was even or odd numbers, you can tell if the plane is going west or east.
Wait, what?
Some crazy formula.
Oh, my God.
And so he walked back and he said, I was wondering how long it'd take you guys to figure it out, because if you would have looked at the altitude, you would have known we were going in the opposite direction. Well, how are we supposed to know that? So anyway, it was quite the moment where Walt knew soon after the pilots knew, and I don't think anybody else knew. And so where were we? Somewhere between Waco and Houston, if I had it right on the map.
East Texas somewhere.
So somewhere 2 hours out or so, 2 hours away from Phoenix, an hour or so away
Yeah,
from
we were
New
more
Orleans.
than halfway for sure.
And they had already moved the kickoff earlier, so it would have been a early morning for most of us getting up and going over to the game. And then news broke, and it obviously made a lot of sense when you're evacuating the city. All of a sudden, not only does a preseason game become more meaningless than ever, but those folks who are having to work the preseason game in the New Orleans metro area had a lot far bigger concerns to deal with, as in how do we evacuate our own families? And the players were in that boat as well.
Yeah, it was just so strange. And because we don't have internet on that particular plane, I was joking with people that, my family, which is true after I talked, my family knew that I was coming back before I did because, once the game is canceled, they realize I'm probably going to come back. And we didn't know the game was canceled,
So you had your birthday celebration instead that weekend?
That's basically what happened, yeah.
So it became a 48-hour bender.
We're recording
for Darren
this
Urban.
on Larry Fitzgerald's birthday.
Oh, that is right.
And Darren Urban's birthday as well.
Don't slight yourself, Darren. Come on now.
Just saying.
Do you guys, come on, you guys traded a text message just like Christian Kirk traded a text message with
I
Larry
tweeted at him.
Fitzgerald?
I noticed he did not get back to me. I wasn't going to bother him with a text
When
message.
he's done with his 36 holes, he'll get around to getting back to you on that
Possible.
one. So, by the way, Felipe, do you consider the fact that the Cardinals only had 2 preseason games compared to the fact the Titans had 3 preseason games, and they had a week-long joint practice with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the defending Super Bowl champions, factor or not a factor, real or not real, as you try and decide whether that's an advantage, that's an advantage or not, week 1 at Tennessee?
I would say no, just because obviously Ryan Tannehill's still on the COVID list, so he hasn't been practicing. AJ Green has been banged up. Julio Jones hasn't seen the field all throughout preseason, and so that's not an advantage. I think the Cardinals team is, between the two, they have the advantage, because for the most part, they've all been intact, from on both sides of the ball. Obviously, J.J. Watt returned later on in training camp, so I did feel for guys like Greg Dortch and the Benjamins. Obviously, he made the roster, and the Jonathan Wards and all that. Because I feel like that preseason game, the preseason finale against the Saints, was going to be pretty pivotal for guys like that. And so my mind always goes back to those type of players. But in terms of whoever's going to have an advantage, I mean, both teams have a 4-day weekend, mandatory weekend. They all have a clean slate. So those guys are going to be able to return from the COVID list. Guys are going to be able to get healthy again. So there's no advantage. I don't want to hear that, come week 1. I don't want to hear people be like, oh, well, the Titans didn't have so-and-so and so forth. Like, no, it's a clean slate. It's week 1. The NFL season is here. So I'm pretty hyped.
And look, it was going to be 3rd and 4th stringers playing at New Orleans anyway, and Cliff Kingsbury confirmed it would have been Chris Streveler, 4 quarters of Chris Streveler with Colt McCoy dressed just in case in an emergency capacity. And by the way, one of my big takeaways, even though Cliff Kingsbury hinted heavily, is that they stayed with 3 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Chris Streveler barely saw the field a year ago, obviously. And then when he got in week 17, it didn't go so well, and yet he's still on the roster. As much as we love Strev and mandatory Streveler, it is surprising to me that they kept a coveted roster spot for that number 3 quarterback.
Here's why it does not surprise me as much is because of COVID. And I know you could probably get him onto the practice squad and then he'd be around and you could bring him up. But I think the reality is the with how quick everything can happen and how you could lose a guy immediately. I mean, if you wake up on a Sunday, which you at that point you can't pull a guy up from the practice squad, and Kyler Murray, God forbid, or Colt McCoy has tested positive and can't play, you're going to really hope you have that extra quarterback on the roster.
And considering the quarterbacks hang out in the same room and spend lots of hours together, all of a sudden you could be the Denver Broncos reprised, right? Where the Denver Broncos were without 3 or 4 quarterbacks, and they were forced to use a former college quarterback who was like a 4-string receiver in a game last year.
Or maybe they can use Chase Edmonds as an emergency quarterback, as we saw in the latest episode of Flight Plan. You never know. Anything can happen.
By the way,
He likes to believe that, I'm
Right.
sure.
with no game on Saturday,
J.J. Watt.
I was catching up on episodes of Cardinals Flight Plan, the last 2 in particular, and the sister-in-law, who knows nada per sports, and I'll tweet about some of her comments occasionally. And she was over, and she asked a series of questions, including the following. I want you guys to answer the following question from the sister-in-law, and that's fine. You know, she doesn't know football from a foosball. Doesn't matter. Okay, that's great. No worries. But here was her question. I really didn't know how to answer this. Hey, Paul, what's the most dangerous position in football? The most dangerous position in football.
Most dangerous. That's a great question.
I mean, nose tackle?
No, see, I wouldn't say nose. Most dangerous. See, I don't see that as danger. I mean, I think you could get hurt when you're in the trenches more often because of where your knees are and everything. But when you talk about dangerous, like when I think of dangerous, I think of like
Severe injury.
And I would think I'm thinking wide receiver a lot of time because you can get your head torn off at any moment.
You know, and I went that initially, and then I said kick returner. How about kick returner?
No, not anymore.
No, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Or maybe
there's no kick returns.
What's it take to take a knee? Is that what you're saying? Touchbacks are not dangerous?
I can do this all day.
That's right. They'll give you life insurance all day, every day if you're just going to have a touchback and just take a knee in the end zone.
I would say the kicker, though, because, you know, when they kick it off and you try to go tackle the kick returner and then you get blindsided out of nowhere by a
39-year-old Matt Prater, the pencil neck. He's at serious risk trying to make an open field tackle. I love you, Matt.
The most dangerous position in football is only viewed through the prism of whoever that guy's parents is.
That's right.
If your mom and your son's playing kicker, it's kicker. If your mom and your son's playing tight end, it's tight end.
Long snapper.
Aaron Brewer, no, not long snapper. By the way, I love Aaron Brewer. I consider him a friend. He's a really good dude. But when he's in training camp and long snappers and he comes around, he's got that mustache he wears. And he comes in early in the morning, and sometimes he's got the sunglasses on, and the hair is a little bit out of place, and he wears those Hawaiian shirts. I'm like, dude, you walk straight out of a TV series of the PI that has passed his prime and went out drinking too late last night, and now you're trying to figure out what to do the next morning. I swear to God, every time I need to tell him that because every time I see him, I'm like, you totally look right out of a TV series.
It's funny that you mentioned that because my brothers and I, we always, kid around and we ask each other, if you were a player in the NFL, what position would you play? And I think your story just validated my answer. I would be a long snapper because, one, I get paid well. I don't get that injured. I'm not in risk of getting injured. So thank you, Darren, for sure.
If he got some flow going out the back of his helmet, he'd be a dead ringer for Big Lebowski. Is that what you're saying? Sort of the this aggression will not stand, man.
You could, but
he's
not. I don't see him as being that super laid back guy. Although Aaron is pretty laid back, I just see him as like that guy. Like, okay, the woman just came into my office yesterday. I got to get pictures of her husband at the motel with his side piece.
I don't know. You give him a white Russian, it could be the dude. And we'll have to see about that. So you have the
I didn't mean to throw you, Paul.
No, I'm saying, so Ryan Winslow didn't make it, all right? The specialists were never in danger.
No, they were not.
There was, and I know there was a lot of chatter, even talking internally with some of the personnel people. Hey, we might go with 5 receivers. We might just do it.
Who believes that?
I never believed that for one. There was a hot moment, though, when after Keyshawn Johnson was released, and you're wondering 5, or is that extra receiver slot for a guy named Larry Fitzgerald?
Oh, goodness gracious.
There was a lot of that chatter out there. We won't dignify that. We'll move on.
He's 38 today.
As good as Greg Dortch looked in this camp, and I think we're all in agreement, right? Are we all nodding?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. They needed the size, did they not, Felipe? I mean,
course.
Fine diminutive American Greg Dortch over there. I mean, I love him. But when you have a 6'3", 6'4" option in Antoine Wesley, I'm guessing that was the difference, the size difference.
Are we gonna forget that I called this last week? You guys are acting like I didn't mention
when
this.
he made it, I did start to think to myself, I was pretty hard on Wesley not making the team, and Felipe was.
You were so assured.
But hey, this is gonna post. And we're gonna have it on record, and we'll see what happens when they bring back Pugh and Alford, who the person is that isn't. And I'm not saying it's gonna be Wesley. because I do think he's done a lot of really good things and that he deserves it. But he is one of those guys that I'm thinking, okay, when you start talking about who's that extra person or two, if you pick up somebody on waivers, it might be Antoine Wesley.
Could it be the third tight end, Demetrius Harris? Are you saying he could be in the crosshairs? Could it be that last corner, the rookie Tay Gowan? Are you saying
I don't think it's going to be Gowan because, again, whenever he gets cut, I'm afraid somebody will
will
pick him up,
snap him up.
which is why they never did anything like that with Benjamin last year.
Okay.
I'm thinking, maybe Michael Dogby, who's probably the 7th defensive lineman, although with Jordan Phillips just trying to get back into it, I don't know about that. I'm trying to think of some of the other people. Wesley might be somebody. I have to look at the linemen, but I think didn't they end up only going with?
They went with 8 linemen.
Only 8?
8, and Sean Harlow did not make it.
Okay, so then it's not going to be a lineman, obviously. So yeah, we're probably honing in pretty hard on who the possibilities are, whether it would be Harris or Dogby or Wesley. I don't think it would be Barku. Not with your situation now at cornerback. And what do they got? 4 safeties now?
They do have 4 safeties, yep.
But one of them is Washington, who's a special teams guy. So I think we've probably nailed down who these possibilities are. Or maybe Jonathan Ward, maybe, if you want to.
One of the questions that, I was thinking about is, Antoine Wesley only played 1 preseason game. He was hurt for about a week during camp. He obviously didn't play in that preseason finale. What did he show that, regardless of how much he played or missing a week in camp, what did he show for Kingsbury to say, you know what, we're going to keep you on for now, obviously?
Well, I mean, one of the things Wesley did was when A.J. Green went down early in camp, he was one of the first people to step in, and he got a lot of snaps, and I thought he looked pretty good doing that. He had the near catch in the 1 preseason game, couldn't quite hold on to it, but the play itself was pretty nice. And again, I think goes back to what Paul said. Well, there's 2 things. One, he gives you size, and that's something that this team needs. And if something happens to Hopkins and or Green, you don't want to have a bunch of smaller receivers. And once you decide Keyshawn's not your guy, then obviously Wesley moves ahead of him. The other thing, which I don't think you can push aside too hard, this is a guy Cliff Kingsbury knows well. He played at Texas Tech. They're close. I remember talking to Antoine Wesley at the Combine, not knowing he was eventually going to come to the Cardinals, but I was doing a big piece on Cliff Kingsbury in 2019, and nobody was talking to Antoine Wesley when he came in through the interview, so I was able to get off some questions, and he talked about when he got hurt in college, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I can't remember if it was a leg injury or abdomen injury, or there was something where he ended up in the hospital, and he was talking about how much it meant to him when Cliff Kingsbury showed up at the hospital while he was going through this and saying, don't worry about anything. You're going to be okay. And when you come back, your spot's there and all this stuff. And, he is a big Cliff Kingsbury fan, as he told me at the time. And I just feel like that also plays into it. Here's a guy who Cliff knows and is confident in. And when he starts making plays, that's one way you end up on a team.
And it helps that, well, if you guys didn't know, he was staying with Kyler Murray at the beginning of camp, like the first couple of weeks. So if you have your quarterback's, confidence, plus your coach, I think that says a lot about the talent that he is.
It's funny that you say that, too, because a lot of people thought one of the things that Keyshawn had going for him was that he was close with Kyler, which he was. They were part of that same draft class. But, if Kyler has gotten a relationship with Wesley, that can't hurt.
By the way, I look at Wesley and I see that as evidence that practice does matter. That when Cliff Kingsbury says that Kyler Murray is ready to go, that's based on what he has seen in practice, not the 9 snaps, not the trio of 3 and outs and the -1 total yards. It's what he's seen at practice. And in practice, Antoine Wesley made a lot of plays. And he was a dog. I mean, he's supposedly a really good guy off the field. You guys know him probably a lot better than I do off the field. But on the field, he competed. I mean, he was trading a lot of trash talk with Robert Alford. He was hand-fighting guys. He was making catches in the red zone. The size was a factor. And when you have a lot of smaller guys out there, there's no doubt that moved the meter with all the coaches. And I think it's a big difference with this Cardinals offense this year. When they get into the red zone and they have the addition of a Rondale Moore, smaller guy, but you have a 6'4" A.J. Green who has looked superb in camp. You have a James Conner, 230 plus. It's just a different Cardinals offense in the red zone. And then if you're going to go 10 personnel in the red zone, Antoine Wesley, I bet's going to be out there. And Cliff Kingsbury is one of those rare coaches who will spread it out in the red zone in the NFL.
And I remember Cliff Kingsbury's first year with the Cardinals, he was running a lot of 10 personnel in the first couple of weeks of the season, and he didn't necessarily have the roster to execute that at a high level. So he went away from that. Last year he ran a lot of 12 personnel, but I think this year more than any of his other seasons, he finally has a talent to run a 10 personnel because you have Rondale Moore, you have Christian Kirk, obviously A.J. Green, and D-Hop. So when it comes to the red zone, man, this offense has the potential to be one of the top 5 offenses in the red zone.
But here's my question, and I'm because I know long before you joined us, Felipe, back when Paul and Kyle would throw down, I think Paul was leaning more, especially once they signed James Conner, that maybe they'd get a little bit more physical with their offense and that kind of stuff, and maybe get away from 10 personnel. Kyle was very much like, I think they're going to move back towards 10 personnel because they have the people. I lean a little bit more towards that. The question is when you get into that red zone, when you get inside the 10-yard line, are you running still a bunch of shotgun with 4 wide receivers? There's a lot of people out there that get really leery about that because it is harder to convert in that smaller area, and guys are coming in, and I am curious to know how that unfolds, and we don't really know exactly how it's going to be used this year because we didn't see much in the preseason.
And I'm not saying I'm in favor of it. I'm just saying that the head coach might be apt to use it. And if he does, he is definitely better equipped than 2019, to your point, Felipe, when week 2 at Baltimore, 3 times they got inside the 5, and they're denied every time. They had to settle for field goals, and a lot of that spreads stuff at the time just wasn't effective, especially against a hard-hitting, physical Baltimore Ravens defense that was manhandling receivers off the line.
And not just the Ravens. I mean, last year against the Patriots, do you guys remember when Kenyon Drake failed to score at the 1 yard
half? Yep.
Exactly. So, and when they drafted Rondale Moore, the question always popped up in my head: will they use a lot of pre-snap motion? Would they, pre-snap motion combined with some play action with the read option? Now that they have someone like Rondale Moore.
Sure, absolutely.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, the most staggering stat from a year ago is the Cardinals were dead last in the NFL in pre-snap motion. It's astounding, isn't it, when you think of Cliff Kingsbury and his sort of offense? But with Andy Isabella not being a reliable component of that offense, it took away a lot of the pre-snap motion. I would presume Kyle Shanahan and the Niners were number 1 in that category. That's not a surprise. But the Cardinals being dead last, that's a shocker to me, and I do not expect that to happen again this year. Not at all. As I, for whatever reason, just turned off my mic as I reached for my phone and somehow turned off my mic. So that's the last. See, that's the last. It's still August, right? That's the last August mistake that's going to be permitted around here. It's like, once again, it's the purge. It's the purge. So I can just throw that out. That's one of those things that can just be discounted because the preseason, once we hit September, is officially done with. As I segue to the following question and try and save my own keister, which is blowing in the wind right now. The player you are most excited to see in a game, that counts, that was not here in 2020, Darren Urban, a player who was not here last year, whether it's a rookie, a veteran, a newcomer, you are most excited and eager to see in a game is?
I'm going to go with a low-hanging fruit. I'm sorry. But J.J. Watt, now that he's back healthy, I'm dying to know not only to see him play, but how they deploy him. I think this is a team that I want to see more push in the pocket, but I do think that JJ is going to get some snaps coming from the outside, and I think they're going to move him around a little bit, just like he always has in his career. And I'm really excited. I mean, there's a long list there, but I know you two have to take your turns, and I guess I'm going to have to let you do that. So I'm going to go J.J. Watt and let everybody else for you guys.
Right, there you go. You're up, Felipe. What do you think?
I kind of touched on it already, but I'm going to go with Rondale Moore because, like I said, Cliff Kingsbury finally has the roster and the talent in that wide receiver group to run some 10 personnel. But when you have A.J. Green talking about how Moore catches passes like he's a 6'4" wide receiver on the outside, that gives me confidence. I mean, he led Purdue in receptions per game last year. So, and to your point, last year when the Cardinals ran some pre-snap motions combined with play action, which was only 59 attempts, they had a 54% success rate. So that goes to tell you that now that he has the pieces on the offensive side, Cliff Kingsbury, you might see a lot more 10 personnel now that you have guys like A.J. Green, Rondo Moore. Hopefully Andy Isabella is a little bit more acclimated to that offense. So Rondo Moore is my pick.
See, the consultants would say never agree. Always go a different direction, try and keep this thing going. But honestly, in the trust tree, I would go with Rondale Moore as well. And here's why. Because the players are talking about Rondale Moore. I was talking with a veteran. And
wait, this is the person you want to see the most, and it's because the players are talking about. I'm not saying who's going to have the biggest impact. I want to say who you want to see.
Because I am the most intrigued by Rondale Moore based on the buzz among players, because we all know the hashtag players know players, and they're talking about Rondale Moore. One guy said, hey, that kid's only scratching the surface. A week later, I'm talking to a veteran player, and he walked by Rondale Moore, and he literally stopped what he was saying, and once Rondale Moore walked past it, that kid's going to be good. And so he has the other players. Now, in terms of sheer impact and who's going to be the most vital to the Arizona Cardinals in week 1, I don't think there's any denying Zaven Collins is that guy.
But again, the question is, who do you want to see? Not who the most impactful is. Not
Who
who
do
the
you
players want to see.
Right.
Paul, I'm trying to put this on your plate, and you're like going on this other tangent.
No,
And you're on the sideline, Paul.
Just sheer seeing someone. But if you want to see the importance, it depends how you define.
No.
The newcomer.
It depends on how Paul Calvisi defines it, because it's who Paul wants to see.
Right. So
It's okay if you say Rondale Moore, but don't have all these. Just say this is who I want to see.
Rondale Moore is my guy.
All right.
Okay. But that's just from a sheer highlight. The offense can get by without him. The defense can't get by without Zaven Collins.
It doesn't matter. Zaven Collins doesn't count because you already picked Rondale Moore.
And Paul, going to your point that you stand on the sideline, so that goes to your credentials.
Sure.
So when you stand next to Rondale Moore, do you guys see eye to eye, or?
It's pretty close. I'd rather stand next to Greg Dortch. That's more of a that's more of my. I'd be really certain about Greg Dortch. Rondale Moore might be a little close. As for the guy you're most excited to see in a game, and I'm going to let Darren cool down a little bit here, Felipe, so I'm going to you first. The guy you're most excited to see in a game that counts that was here last year. Who is that guy?
Christian Kirk for me. I mean, he was the second most targeted player last year, led the team in receiving touchdowns with 6. Yes, he led the team in receiving touchdowns with 6. DeAndre Hopkins only had 5. He had the second most red zone targets. He's in a contract year. He has that chip on his shoulder, I should say. And he's a hometown guy. You talked about it today in his press conference that, there's some territory that comes with being the hometown guy, and he's in his contract year. He's improved every single season. Hopefully he stays healthy, because if he stays healthy and you have guys like A.J. Green, Rondo Moore, and DeAndre Hopkins in that same receiver group, then that just opens up so much more opportunity for someone like Christian Kirk. So hopefully he capitalizes on the fact that maybe Fitzgerald doesn't come back, so that means more opportunity for him, and having the flex, that versatility in that wide receiver group. So Christian Kirk is my guy.
All right, you're next, Paul. I mean, I'm
you
not,
need a little more time in the cooling off room.
No, I'm just saying. I want you to, but again,
That's who you want.
Paul Calvisi. Who does Paul Calvisi want to see?
Chandler Jones. Okay, I'm going Chandler Jones. He looks great. The weight is down. He's obviously got to be motivated. Sources close to Chandler say that he feels, quote, unstoppable right now. Okay, not exactly sure why he was out for an extended period of time. Was there anything given as to why?
None.
Zero.
Although it's funny when you say unstoppable, because you hear him saying that all the time. So are you saying did you just overhear him saying that?
Sources very close to Chandler Jones. You can take that.
I can hear
the
him
way
saying
you want
it in my head.
It's a good investigative reporter there, Darren, digging a little deeper with a follow-up question as to ascertain the nature of the source exactly. So Chandler Jones, yes, very intrigued, especially now that he has company along that defensive front. To your point about 99, what exactly is that going to look like, and how will it benefit those guys going after the quarterback?
I like that one. Chandler Jones is, and it is very intriguing. I know it's easy to say, but with everything that's happened in camp, I'm going to go with the quarterback because there's been so much said about Kyler Murray and should he be playing in the preseason and what kind of camp did he really have and how did he look? And he did look like to me, he started out a little slower, but got better, which is kind of what camp is for. Like, I don't have a problem with him having a slow start to camp because that's the whole point. You haven't been practicing all off season for the most part, and then you come into camp. You should be slower at first comparatively. If you're really good at the beginning, I'm wondering a little. But him talking about how he didn't really want preseason games and he only had the 3 series and they didn't go well. I don't think ultimately that there's a straight line between him not playing well against the Chiefs and what happens the first week. But the spotlight is going to be intense on him when they open the season in Tennessee, because we all know if he struggles or this offense struggles, everybody's going to say, see, you should have played all 3 preseason games. And even once they canceled New Orleans, you should have played the Saints on your own because you should have had those snaps. We all know that that's what the argument's going to be. So I think there's a little bit of pressure there as he comes in, and he is in his 3rd year. And this team does rely so much on not only what he does because he's the quarterback, but on what they're going to need from him to make the kind of push that is expected to play. I heard DeAndre Hopkins yelling at me and Mike Jurecki today as we came off the practice field. He goes, how many, what are you guys predicting? How many wins are we going to get? And that's a great question because I think a lot of it will go back to the quarterback and how well he really plays and whether getting all these weapons and getting Cliff Kingsbury into his 3rd year of play calling, how much of that makes a difference.
If you're to recap what we heard about Kyler Murray over the course of August, we had a couple of players going on the record saying he has better arm strength, better zip, better velocity on the football. We heard that on the record. I think it was Budda Baker in the Pash Pod, or maybe it was Chase Edmonds, maybe both, and then Christian Kirk confirmed that on the Big Red Rage about the arm strength. So there's that. And then it was Christian Kirk who just recently shared with the media that Kyler is more apt to send video clips from some of the film work and specific video clips to specific receivers and weapons on the team and say, hey, you know what? Think about doing it this way, or this looks good, or why don't we try this? So that seems to be encouraging, that this evolution of Kyler as a team leader. How many times has Cliff Kingsbury said this offseason and during this Cardinals camp that it's his team now? He feels like it's his team, whether that's because he's in year 3 and or because of the departure of an absolute team leader like a Larry Fitzgerald. There's no question whose offense and whose team it is now. So these are all factors that go beyond just the talent, beyond just the marketing moniker we threw out there, come for the arms, stay for the legs. These are all the other elements that make you a franchise quarterback, that make you a winning quarterback. When I hear Kyler say in that interview, I think it was with ESPN, that we started feeling ourselves after that 6-3 start. And guess what? Maybe some of the attention to detail waned. It sounds like there was a lesson learned last year. So to me, that's encouraging. If you're in that locker room, that starting with the quarterback, everybody has learned, okay, every single rep of every regular season game matters. This isn't the NBA where you can have an off night and it doesn't matter.
I feel like the reason that this team underperformed, so to speak, in the second half of the regular season last year was because there might have been a lack of leadership. I feel like Kyler Murray self-evaluated over the offseason and told himself, you know what, for this team to be successful in the second half of the season, I am going to have to be a leader. I am going to have to take those steps and take control of the team because, I mean, you guys know better than anyone covering the NFL for years and years and decades and decades. And
all right.
that to be successful towards the end of the season and into the postseason, you have to have good leadership. And I feel like Kyler Murray is taking a step into that direction. Hopefully he maintains it throughout the entire season. But, it's a positive step for the Arizona Cardinals.
Well, if it's not Kyler, obviously it could be Cam Newton. Did you see when Cam Newton was released? How many of these, I don't even know what you call them. They're not national publications. I don't know if they're blogs, but there was at least a half dozen to 10 outlets, NFL outlets, that had the Cardinals as a top 5 or top 3 destination for Cam Newton. I mean, no, and more no. Are you kidding me? Not to mention the Cardinals got a firsthand look at Cam Newton a year ago with his sub-30 passer rating in New England. He was horrific last year, even though the Cardinals figured out a way to lose that game, which was probably the most vexing aspect of that loss in New England, is that Cam Newton was terrible.
Yeah. Look, the reality is that Cam Newton is not vaccinated, and a lot of people think that that's a possible reason that he's no longer in New England, and it's going to be tough for him just to get back into a building because he's got to have a 5-day waiting period just to
Wow.
get to any places. And I know I read one Dallas writer who said Cam Newton would be a great backup for Dak Prescott, but there's no way you can take that risk with him unvaccinated right now. So I mean, that's a reality. But
there are Vegas odds out as to the likelihood of where he might go. Pittsburgh is number 1, the most likely. The Cardinals are 8th, according to official Vegas odds. You can wager on where Cam Newton is headed next.
What are the
Where's
teams
Washington?
ahead of him? Yeah,
where's Washington?
What are the teams ahead of him? Do you have one?
I do not have
come
1
on.
through 8. I'm sorry. I do
That's
not
all
have
right.
1 through 8. Dallas is number 2, though. Dallas is tied for number 2.
Okay. I
Behind
was just
Pittsburgh.
curious. But, the Cam Newton thing is really, really interesting. Now, it may have nothing to do with vaccinations. It may have everything to do with, all right, we have Brian Hoyer, although I think they officially cut Brian
they cut
Hoyer,
him.
but they're going to bring him right back because he's not going anywhere else. They know they can have a handshake deal under the table, and then this way they can get a guy who's hurt onto the regular roster and then put him on IR in 2 days and then bring back Hoyer. So they're going to have Brian Hoyer as their backup. Okay, so you just feel like, okay, we're going to move on. We're going to have Brian Hoyer, the guy who knows how to be a backup, as our backup. And then you don't have any pressure on Mac Jones in terms of, okay, now that he's got the job, we're not going to have this, in your face that there's a guy on the bench that if things go bad, we're going to throw him out there. And I in a lot of ways, I do like that idea because it's tough for a young quarterback knowing that it's over the shoulder a little bit, in my opinion.
And besides, you can't have a Cam Newton in the risk of that locker room being divided into factions between those who want the rookie quarterback
Right.
and those who want
That's
the
what I would
established
think.
former MVP. You just,
That's what I would think.
the-
It makes no sense here for the Cardinals, though. I mean, I think
No.
it's been proven that Colt McCoy. First of all, Colt McCoy has been better in camp, Felipe, than I thought he was going to be. So I've been impressed with him, and he's like the perfect backup guy. And Cam Newton's not coming in to be a third guy.
I feel like they just mentioned Cam Newton because of the similar play styles between Kyler Murray
That's so
and Cam
lazy,
Newton,
though.
and I feel like that's typical. Like to your point, that is pretty lazy. But I wouldn't be shocked if he goes back to his coach Ron Rivera from his time with the Panthers.
Yeah, except with my first thought, and again, I don't want to turn this into a COVID thing, but Ron Rivera has had cancer, and he gets mad at his players that don't get vaccinated. He's not bringing in, no matter how much he loves.
Maybe
Cam
that
Newton.
convinces Cam.
Maybe. Mike Zimmer hasn't convinced Kirk Cousins yet.
They're not that close,
Yeah. So what's left here? Is there a concern? Everyone's going to go into the Labor Day weekend, and they're, mandatory 4 days off, and you got your barbecues lined up, maybe an out-of-town trip, maybe it's a staycation, none of the above, whatever. But there's going to be something, perhaps, that keeps you up at night. You wake up at 3 in the morning, and there's something on your mind with this team. What would that be? What's the biggest concern? What do you think has Cliff Kingsbury getting up even earlier than his typical 3:45 wake-up call and wondering about this team?
What do I think would keep Cliff up, or
Yeah.
what do I think should keep
Let's
Cliff
think of it
up?
through the eyes of the head coach. What should be most potentially vexing right now or concerning between now and September 12th, if you're the head coach, beyond just another COVID outbreak, which is totally beyond his realm?
I mean, honestly, if I'm thinking that, and I don't know the man that well because you just don't get inside his head real easily, but I would think it would be, can my 2 young inside linebackers hold up on a defense, especially now that we just got a little younger at cornerback? Can they hold up? I think I got a pretty decent defensive line. I think my secondary can be okay. Can those guys hold up? That's what I would think.
Are they,
Now, if you were saying, what do I think he should? I mean, my first thought would be, hey, this offense better freaking click. But I don't think he's going to think like that. I think he's pretty confident in the offense.
and you know what? The Titans have had the whole offseason to figure out a way how to exploit a rookie middle linebacker and an inexperienced fellow inside linebacker. And for that reason, I expect to see a lot of Jordan Hicks in Tennessee. I really do. And now, especially with maybe your number situation at corner and Isaiah Simmons better suited, into the slot perhaps. But if I'm a head coach, I'm wondering, oh boy, what do the Titans have in store for my two young inside linebackers?
So you're agreeing with me then?
I would agree with you on that. Yeah.
What would keep me up at night if I was Felipe Kingsbury?
I thought you were Felipe Collins.
Felipe Wilson.
Okay.
Now Marco Wilson.
All right.
Anyway, if I'm thinking about that Week 1 matchup, and obviously they have the top, if not the top, the best running back in the NFL in Derrick Henry. I'm thinking about how that defensive line is going to be looking come Week 1 because they haven't necessarily been on the field at the same time all throughout camp. Jordan Phillips, obviously Chandler Jones has missed a good chunk of training camp along with J.J. Watt. So the cohesiveness of that defensive line would keep me up because you're facing the top running back in the NFL, and your defensive line hasn't seen the field at the same time all throughout camp.
So here's my question, guys. We just got through sitting here saying we both, because me and Paul are on the same thing, and you stayed on the defensive side of the ball. So that's the question. Maybe it's something I got to ask Cliff Kingsbury at some point in a press conference, because I'm curious, like, as a guy with an offensive background, does he worry more about the offense because he's around it more and he knows all the intricate details, or does he worry more about the defense because he doesn't have control over it?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I think I'm going to ask him that question tomorrow.
I'll be right behind
really
you and make sure you ask that. If you forget, I'll make sure
Slap
to tap
me in
you
the
in.
head.
Yeah.
But
flick your ear.
It is a defense that finished in the bottom third in run D a year ago. So to Felipe's point, absolutely, the risk is real of being exploited by Derrick Henry in that run game. There's no doubt about it. On the other hand, your standout left tackle, Taylor Lewan, is coming off a torn ACL, and he only had a few snaps. So good luck with Chandler Jones, especially if J.J. Watt is lined up next to him.
I just want to point out that Paul has agreed with me twice on this segment, on this podcast.
Well, it's because Darren got a little snippy earlier, so I'm ganging up on Darren. That's what we're doing.
For those that can't see,
Paul just can't listen.
For those that can't see right now, there's a lot of tension going on between Darren and Paul. They're sitting right next to each other.
Well, I got half an eye on Darren because I'm not sure what's coming, and then I got half an eye on the doorway in case the Turk comes in here asking for my headset. So you never know what's around the corner. I will say that on paper now, the D line, J.J. Watt, Zach Allen, Jordan Phillips, Lecky Fotu, Rashard Lawrence, Corey Peters, and Vance Joseph is a guy.
Michael Dogby,
absolutely. And by the way, if Dogby does get cut, he will sign to somebody's 53 in an instant.
You think?
Oh, I think so. I really do. And so I'm a big fan of Michael Dogby, and a lot of guys. He's the guy who's been under the radar and really had a great offseason and has been much better this year and so far in camp. So I'm not surprised at all that he actually made this team. Now, whether he dresses on game day, we'll see. What I do expect are 6 defensive linemen out there, at least 5, and they're going to be coming in waves. And if J.J. Watt is not playing over 1,000 snaps like he did last year, guess what? I think we're all intrigued to see that. And he admitted it might be tough. You might have to tell him, okay, guess what? You're sitting out this series, and he might not like it, but long-term it's best for him, and it might turn him into a really productive guy against the run. We'll see.
Yeah.
So
good point. I'm just glad nobody came through the door and whacked you.
That's true. Okay, well, what is real quick, where do they go from here in terms of the procedures and the processes? They can start signing guys to the practice squad effective Wednesday, September 1st. Is that how that works?
They're gonna have their practice squad. I mean, I am hoping that all you people out there grab this up Tuesday afternoon as soon as it's posted and listen to it right away. But there's a very good possibility you could be listening to it and they already have a practice squad. So, but yeah, they'll have the one cool thing about how there's no 4th preseason game this year. And that they can kind of adjust everything. I mean, in the past, you'd have that last preseason game on a Thursday. You'd have final cuts due Saturday. They'd have to do practice squad Sunday. And Monday was still a big scramble. Right now, these teams will be done with practice. I mean, the Cardinals will be finished practice Wednesday morning. And then they'll have put their practice squad together. So by the time they get their bonus practice on Labor Day, they'll have their entire roster together. So that'll be good.
Because there was a moment in there when the Cardinals had 5 receivers after releasing Keyshawn Johnson before the final 53 came out, and there was all this Larry Fitzgerald content coming out on NFL.com and at the NFL Twitter handle. I'm like, wait a minute, what do they know? Is this foreshadowing here? What exactly? And then I realized it's Larry and Darren's birthday,
Yes.
and that was the cause and effect right there.
Yeah.
So, Felipe, I think you join me in wishing Darren a very happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Darren.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
30th birthday, Darren Irvin.
Thank you so much.
You get younger by the day.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then this whole 18 to 34 demo, I don't know. It's not sure it was, how the manners around here.
No cap, baby. No cap.
Yeah, exactly.
No cap.
That'll do it for this edition of Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation, proud partner of the Arizona Cardinals.